Didn't say something about her being here. And I do appreciate the opportunity to be with you. Merriman said I was to introduce myself. My name is Kent Price, and I grew up about 5 blocks from here and actually live there now for my 46 years that I've been in Paducah, except when I've been away at school. I'm an attorney. I went to Georgetown College and then to Vanderbilt Law School, and then have been practicing here in Paducah for the past 20 years with McMurray and Livingston local firm. And I have a wife, Julie, and 2 children, Joseph, age 5, and Jenna, age 3, who I just got a phone call, and she's at the doctor's office and has pneumonia. So you may not want to get too close to me, I'm afraid. She's kind of hurting. But I do thank you for having me to your first meeting of 2007. And if you missed setting off any fireworks at the first of the year here, you probably won't miss anything, because we're going to have a little fireworks today. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but the subject matter that I want to discuss with you is a little controversial, and I've got a lot to cover, so my usual slow southern pace, I'm going to try to pick up a little bit and speed through things. What we're talking about is an event of monumental significance, the 9/11. And there's no way to overstate how important this was to our country and indeed our world. You know, we had 3,000 almost people who died that day. Since that time, we've engaged in a war on terror. It's cost over 3,000 lives now of U.S. military service personnel, scores, tens of thousands more that have been profoundly injured in those battles in Iraq and in Afghanistan. And then we've, since September 11th, appropriated over $500 billion to fight this war. And so a lot of it goes back to justification on this event. And so I'd like to have us look a little bit more at this monumental event. I've got some real suspicions, some problems concerning what happened on 9/11. What I intend to do is to look at something that I think we can look at objectively, and that is what happened to the Twin Towers. And I'm going to attempt to show you some videotape and some pictures, then try to make some points about what I think may have happened. Now, if you have suspicions about 9/11 that you may not have had everything disclosed to you, you're not alone. A recent Zogby poll in May 2006 shows that 42% of Americans believe that the 9/11 Commission and the U.S. government concealed or refused to investigate critical evidence that contradicts the official explanation. And indeed, the 9/11 Commission, after I had already issued its report, has since gone on record saying that they were not provided the records that they needed, or that there were some real issues that they were not able to look into because of lack of cooperation. 45% of Americans think Congress or some international tribunal ought to reinvestigate the attacks. Before I go any further, I do want to make a few disclaimers. I'm speaking here today solely as Kent Price, an individual. I don't represent any group. I certainly don't represent the firm that I work with. I'm just a concerned citizen that sharing some things with you that are puzzling to me and indeed troubling. I'm not a structural or civil engineer. We're going to be talking about why these buildings collapsed. I'm merely a lawyer. I'd be more comfortable being up here telling you about powers of attorney or living wills, or how to protect yourself from identity theft. And maybe you'll someday give me the chance to talk about some of those issues. But today we're talking about something that has to do with buildings collapsing. And finally, like I said, I'll be showing some videotape and some pictures that are no doubt copyrighted. A lot of it comes off of network TV. And so I maintain that I have the right to use this as an educational tool under the fair use exception. So a lot of what you see is copyrighted. Whenever you want to question anything about 9/11, the immediate response that you always get, or that I always get, is, what are you trying to sell us, Price? I mean, some kind of conspiracy theory? What are you peddling here? Well, in short, the answer is yes. I don't know how to get around with saying anything other than I think that there is a conspiracy theory that we ought to consider. What is a conspiracy? As the definition there says, it's an agreement between 2 or more people to perform together an illegal, wrongful, or subversive act. The thing that you need to keep in mind is what our government has told us happened is a conspiracy. and we'll look at, just to refresh ourselves, of what that entailed. Here's how the official story goes. The attacks were planned solely by Al-Qaeda. They were funded by Al-Qaeda and carried out by Al-Qaeda under the direction of Osama bin Laden. These 19 individuals that you see over here, Islamic fundamentalists, are alleged to have been the ones who carried out the attacks themselves by hijacking 4 airliners with box cutters, and then they were able to safely elude all of our FAA and NORAD air defense systems within the country, and somehow pilot those planes that they had never flown before into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, and then one of them, of course, collapsed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. So after the actual crashes with the buildings, the towers collapsed like a pancake, just one floor down upon the other. And then, as I said, the 4th plane crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. We've heard this account so many times that it's been drilled into our heads. It's hard to even envision questioning that. It's like half of America still believes that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, even though everything has proved that there is not. So what I ask you today is to kind of step back, take a deep breath, and let's just look at some things. You don't have to agree with me, but I would ask that you consider a few things that we'll be talking about. When we talk about a conspiracy theory, one thing that I want you to keep in mind is the difference between a good and a bad theory. A good theory will explain most of the relevant facts and is not contradicted by any of those facts. A bad conspiracy theory is one that's going to be contradicted by some of the relevant facts. Now, do I have any teachers here today? Okay, well, you didn't know it, but you're going to get a pop quiz. And let me just have a quick show of hands. How many skyscrapers in the World Trade Center complex collapsed on September 11, 2001? How many believe that none did? Does anybody? How about 1, 2? Okay, 2. We've got some takers on 2. What about 3? Okay, well, we've got some folks that claim 3 collapsed, and then we've got some people that are sitting on the fence and refusing to vote. The correct answer is 3. There were 3 skyscrapers that collapsed that day. One of them, Building 7 in the complex, was 47 stories tall, was not hit by a plane, and it fell down. We're going to be looking at that first. And the reason that I want to spend a little time with looking at Building 7 is that this building is really what got me interested in looking into this, because I thought, here we have a skyscraper that had some small fires, and suffered no real damage when the 2 towers collapsed. Yet at 5 o'clock or 5:10 that afternoon, it just collapsed. And I think when you look at the video, you're going to have to say that it at least looks like a controlled demolition. If you've seen one on TV or elsewhere. If you'll notice, the building is just going straight down. It just all of a sudden starts collapsing and then goes straight down into its own footprint. One thing that I found out about this particular collapse is that the speed with which the building fell was what's called free fall speed. If you took a billiard ball or a bowling ball and dropped it off the top of that 47-story building, it would fall in less than 7 seconds. Well, this building fell within 7 seconds. It's like there was no resistance from the prior floors underneath it. That defies the laws of physics and needs an explanation. Here's where the building is located. This is a picture of the 47-story tall Building 7. This is its location in the World Trade Center complex. These are the 2 towers that fell, Buildings 1 and 2. Building 7 was, as the slide says, a modern steel frame building. It was some 350 feet away from the closest tower that fell. And as I indicated, it was not hit by an airplane. It had some interesting tenants that had office space in that building. There was a large CIA undercover office in that building. It had the Department of Defense office. It had the Secret Service office. It had the Securities and Exchange Commission, which happened to be storing a lot of files from the Enron investigations, the WorldCom investigations that you may have heard about. And then on the 23rd floor was a command center, emergency command center of Mayor Rudolph Giuliani. It's where he maintained a command center for any emergencies that might present themselves within the city. This is again just a picture of Building 7, and you can see this is while the tower number 1 is collapsing, and here it sits. You know, it's doing all right. It's hasn't been just devastated by objects falling off of World Trade Center 1. These are 2 other buildings within the World Trade Center complex, Building 5 and Building 6. These pictures, of course, were taken after the devastation of that day, and you'll see that both of them sustained incredible damage from steel and building materials that fell on them. But they remained standing just fine. And both of them had very severe fires that resulted that day and burned a lot worse than either of the towers did. But they were able to withstand that assault and remain standing until they were taken down after the fact. Let me just show you one other view of World Trade Center 7 collapsing. And in this one, I want you to concentrate on the very top of the World Trade Center. There's a penthouse, let's call it, at the very top. You'll see that it gives way first. And that's a sign of controlled demolition where you plant explosives and it pulls the bottom out of the building. It cuts all the columns and the base of the building and implodes it inward. And so the first thing to do to make it fall in on itself is to pull out the center core columns, and that's what appears to be happening in this instance.
Again, what you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself.
Describe that.
Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the 3rd time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down. And
I'll go ahead and stop it there. That, of course, was Dan Rather making the commentary while seeing the building collapse, and his impression was it looks like a controlled demolition that we've all seen so often. Incidentally, you just never see that video on TV anymore. A lot of times we'll see pictures and video of the planes hitting the towers, but you don't see any of that type of video presented. These are 2 instances of other major fires in steel frame skyscrapers in the United States in recent years. And I show them just to point out the significance of what happened with World Trade Center Building 7, because never before that day has any steel frame building collapsed because of fire. Yet on that day, really 3 buildings supposedly did. And I won't go into the details of each of these fires, but these 2 were far more severe. They were burned hot enough to break windows and spread floor to floor, and they burned for hours and hours. One of them for 18 hours, another for 17 hours. Far longer than what happened with any of the buildings in the World Trade Center. Here again is one of the other buildings of the World Trade Center complex, and you can see that it's gutted with fire. That's far more aflame, a hotter intensity fire than you'll see in pictures of the Twin Towers on fire. They were bombarded with debris from the falling towers, yet they somehow managed to survive. What you know, we've had government studies of what happened that day. Really, FEMA did a study in 2002, and then NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Testing, did a voluminous study which was published in 2005. What did FEMA tell us about that day? What caused Building 7 to fall? They don't know. They say the specifics of the fire in World Trade Center 7 and how they caused the building to collapse remain unknown at this time. Further research, investigation, and analyses are needed to resolve this issue. The problem is there can't be any further research or analysis because immediately after the collapse, instead of roping it off like a crime scene and saying, don't touch this steel because we need to test it, that was immediately hauled off, sold to China for scrap metal, and there's no way to go about doing any further investigation of it. In its report, FEMA admitted that its best possible explanation had only a low probability of occurrence. So we've got this totally unexplained event out there. One thing that that is interesting to me is that on national TV, the owner of this particular building, or the owner of the company that owned the largest share of World Trade Center 7 and the entire complex, admitted that the building was pulled. Now, pulled is a term of art within the controlled demolition industry, meaning, like I said, to use controlled demolitions, to pull the support, the foundation out from under building. And Merriman, I'll ask you to turn this up just a little bit because it's got Mr. Silverstein talking. This, as the slide says, aired on PBS on a show called America Rebuilds.
Evacuate to safety.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
To me, it's pretty interesting that he referred to it as pulling the building. How was there time to plant demolition devices within the building on that day if it had not been done in advance in order to pull the building? But this is an aerial view of the World Trade Center 7 site, and you can see here that it just collapsed wholly within its own footprint. It went straight down. This just left a very small rubble pile and didn't harm either of the buildings on either side of it. It just went straight down, which is again indicative of a controlled demolition. You know, how thoughtful of the terrorists not to make the building collapse outward where it would hurt other buildings or possibly injure other people, but instead they apparently brought it straight down. Let me just quickly show you another little video. And this, if you look at the right-hand side of the building, you'll see what are called demolition squibs, little explosives going off along that area. And I apologize for the quality of the video, but can you see them going off as the building is coming down? Those squibs are going off, indicating explosions within the building as it fell. This slide and the next couple have to do with the construction of the World Trade Center buildings themselves. And now we're moving to actually talk about the two twin towers. And as it says, the buildings were 110 stories. They were over 1,300 feet tall. And I won't go into all of it unless you're just interested, and we can talk about a lot of this if you have questions afterwards. But they had core columns here that were just massive columns of steel planted in the bedrock 7 stories down under Manhattan. And then they were surrounded by steel columns, box columns, all along the edge. Those columns, the core columns, and the perimeter columns were tied together by steel mesh of trusses. And you can kind of see the core columns there and then the perimeter columns going up beside them. The perimeter columns, these outside columns, were tied together by what's called spandrels, these bands of steel that were bolted together and ran all the way around the building on every floor to hold it in place. This is just a view of a diagram of a typical core column showing the steel. At that particular part, the steel was 2 inches thick and about 3 feet wide, but at the very base, a lot of it was 3 feet or 4 feet wide, or even 5 feet wide and 5 inches wide in the steel itself. And here, this is just a picture of one of the type of columns that supported the structure. The World Trade Center was designed to withstand, a hurricane, a gale force wind, and again, it had the steel trusses that held everything in place were said by FEMA to be substantially more redundant than typical bar joist floors. Again, I'm running pretty short on time, and I don't want to take a lot of time to talk about what the official studies found. Again, I'll be glad to go through those in detail if you have any questions after we get done. But what's important to note is that really both of the studies that were done really come down to the fire being what brought down those buildings, that somehow the fire weakened the steel, causing the buildings to collapse. And again, you didn't see steel that was starting to weaken and the buildings start to sag. 1 second they're standing straight and tall, and then the next they're just going down symmetrically at free fall speed. And I contend that defies physics, defies the laws of nature, and is indicative of something else going on than what these studies say. One thing we need to keep in mind is that the towers were not hot fires, and when I say hot, there's no question that they were hot to humans. In fact, people jumped out of the North Tower, about 200 people, because of the smoke and the heat of the flames. But when you see those big fireballs, it looks like this is such an intense inferno. How could anything survive this? But really, that is the fuel that in the jet airplanes that burned up on the outside of the building. So that fuel never made it in to cause any resulting fire within the buildings. And FEMA and NIST say that the jet fuel burned itself out within 10 minutes, and from then on it was just whatever was burning inside the building, the office furniture, the desks, the computer equipment, paper that's in there. And all of those items, including the jet fuel, are hydrocarbons, and a hydrocarbon fire can at most rise to 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not nearly enough to melt steel. That's enough to weaken steel, but it's not enough to melt it. But no study that's been done has shown that the fires got anywhere even close to 1,800 degrees. You need a blast furnace type environment to do that, where you've got oxygen supplied to bring the temperature up to just the right level. I'm going to skip this. It's just a helicopter circling the North Tower that shows that there's a lot of black smoke billowing out. And this was before the second tower was even hit, so it's less than 15 minutes after the first plane crashed. And the fact that there's just dark black smoke shows that it's oxygen starved. It's not an intense fire. Again, if you're interested, I'll be glad to go back through some of these things. Again, this is the crash site on the North Tower, and what was interesting to me about this particular slide is that you can see people, and I know it's hard to see from this distance, but there's people actually in that crash site looking out, hoping to be rescued. The fire in that area is not so hot that they can't stand up there and right where the plane impacted. And the fires really didn't burn that long. In the South Tower, it collapsed after burning only 56 minutes, and in the North Tower after burning only an hour and 42 minutes. So again, the fires were not the intense infernos as they're often characterized to be. This is the North Tower 30 seconds before it collapsed, and you can see that really at that time only one floor appears to be really actively on fire. The rest is just smoldering. firemen made it to the 78th floor of the south tower, which was right below where it was, really right at the point where it was hit, maybe a couple floors below. They reported a Captain Palmer, his battalion reached there, and they said, you know, that there was, his quote was that there was only 2 isolated pockets of fire, and he called for 2 hoses, 2 engines to put that out. They thought they could put the fire out, but then 11 minutes later, the whole building just collapses without warning. We're going to move now to talk just about some of the characteristics that the collapses displayed that are indicative of a controlled demolition. And some of these we've already talked about. I'm not going to go through each of them in depth because of time, but the ones that I've got highlighted in red here are the ones that we're going to look at just briefly. And again, I'm going to try to use some video so that you're not having to listen to me. This next video clip is a collection of news reports from that day as they happened that were collected by a couple of folks who put together a documentary called Loose Change. And I'm just going to play some of this.
We heard another explosion, and I'm assuming that's the one that came from the lower level, since there were 2. And I said,
right, because it was like 18 minutes apart.
Well, this is the first explosion, and there was a second explosion in the same building. There were 2 explosions.
Okay.
Federal agencies that were down there do believe that there was some sort of explosive device somewhere else besides the planes hitting.
NBC's Pat Dawson is close to the scene of that attack. Pat?
Just moments ago, I spoke to the Chief of Safety for the New York City Fire Department. Chief Albert Turry, he received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. He tried to get his men out as quickly as he could, but he said that there was another explosion which took place. And then an hour after the first hit here, with the first crash that took place, he said, there was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. He thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building. The second device he speculates, was probably planted in the building.
There were 2 or 3 similar huge explosions, and the building literally shook. You literally shook at the base of the building.
First one and then the other. Some say after secondary explosions.
When a big explosion happened, all of a sudden the elevator blew up, smoke. I dragged the guy out, his skin was hanging off, and I dragged him out, and I helped him out to the ambulance.
Walking down the stairs and into the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor.
Just got out of the tunnel and it blew.
The subway tunnel?
Yeah.
Tell us what's happening out there.
Oh my
We just witnessed some kind of secondary follow-up explosion on the World Trade Center number 2 in the Wall.
Secondary.
We understand now there has been a secondary explosion on Tower 2.
There was another major explosion. The building itself, literally the top of it came down, sending smoke and debris everywhere. Collapsed.
5 blocks from the World Trade Center, and we were standing here when there was some sort of collapse or explosion. Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse? To me, it sounded like an explosion.
When I tried to save people, in a moment we heard a big explosion coming down. Everything just went black. Everything came down, glass started popping, and people got hurt, stuff went on top of them, and it was a big explosion, and everything got dark, real dark, like snow.
The FBI is here, as you can see. They had roped this area off. They were taking photographs and securing this area just prior to that huge explosion that we all heard and felt.
Coming over our radio, get out of the area, the second tower is coming down.
They tell you the second tower is
Yes, it's about to collapse.
At 10:30, I tried to leave the building, but as soon as I got outside, I heard a second explosion and another rumble and more smoke and more dust. I ran inside the buildings, the chandelier shook, and again, black smoke filled the air. Within another 5 minutes, we were covered again with more silt and more dust. And then a fire marshal came in and said we had to leave because if there was a third explosion, this building might not last.
We just saw that as well. The second tower, the only one that was standing, tower number 1, just we saw some kind of explosion, a lot of smoke come out at the top of the tower, and then it collapsed down onto the streets below.
David Lee, what can you tell us?
John, just seconds ago there was a huge explosion, and it appears right now the second World Trade Tower has just collapsed.
Okay, clearly there was something more going on in the way of explosions or damage to the buildings other than the plane crashes themselves. Firemen also reported hearing explosions, and I'll just play a short little clip here. This one's just very short. This is some firemen that were interviewed by a French pair of brothers, the Naudet brothers, who were making a documentary about the fire department that day.
2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, it started popping out. It was if they had detonated. Yeah, detonated. Planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
Then there was this explosion that was caught on a film on CNN while Tom Clancy was being interviewed. You'll see this big cloud come up here. Here are the 2 towers. They're both standing at this point, and you've got a huge explosion cloud coming up beside Tower 1. That's in the general vicinity of Building 6, and when there were aerial photographs taken of Building 6 afterwards, there was holes in it all the way down to the sub-basement, and just as if the explosion had occurred there. I've never seen anything mentioned about this in the FEMA report or anything else for that matter. And then let me just show you quickly these explosive squibs, and they're highlighted here where you can see forceful ejections from the building as it's collapsing. These are not being caused by the floor pancaking down because it happens several floors beneath where the alleged pancaking is or collapsing is taking place. Besides explosions, another characteristic of a controlled demolition is that you'll find the building materials just reduced to very fine dust, like it's like flour, like powder. This is a picture of a street scene there in New York City on 9/11, and it's almost like it snowed. The streets are just covered with very fine powder. How did that come about? What energy level does it take to reduce all of the building materials other than steel to such minute dust or powder? Some of it was measured on the order of 10 microns, which is just tiny. Scientists were able to determine the gravitational potential energy that a building has, and they measured that for both of the towers. And when you look at the energy that would take to reduce all of the contents of the buildings, including the concrete and the gypsum board and all the building materials, it would take 24 to 106 times the amount of energy that FEMA says was available just by the pure gravitational force of the buildings coming down. Something was added to the mix to cause everything just to be pulverized. Explosive controlled demolitions would do that. This is an interesting video that I found very interesting, and I brought a couple of my son's blocks that I forgot to bring up with me, but I was going to demonstrate this. If Merriman or Tammy, maybe could you pull those out? Might just give you an idea of what you're going to look at, and I promise we're getting close to the end, and I appreciate your attention today. If this is a tower, what you're going to see in this video is just the top section, and this is the South Tower, tilt over like this. But instead of, in this top section is about 30 floors, over 200 feet tall. As it's tipping over, instead of falling down in a big chunk like this, like all the laws of science would tell you should happen, this part just turns to dust before it gets to the ground. And instead of leaving this remaining stump, I'll call it, or base of a building, it it just continues to pancake down, in their words, or just to disintegrate. And if there was truly a pancake collapse like FEMA would want you to believe, then this should have remained standing, and this should have hit the ground as a big chunk. You know, I work in the U.S. Bank building on one of the higher floors there, and if I took a concrete block and dropped it out of the window from high up there, it would break into some small pieces, but it wouldn't just be pulverized like you're going to see happen with this particular building. And again, my mouse has run off. I can't, there he is.
Appearing to fall away from the rest of the building. If we go to the tape now, here we go right here.
Can you see how that angle there? The top of that building is at least 22 degrees leaning over to the side, but instead of falling down as a block, it is pulverized.
When you look at it, the building has collapsed. That tower just came down.
Let's go to Bob Bazell, who is that same.
This is another, a little bit closer view of that top of that tower falling off. But instead of continuing its momentum and falling down as a chunk, it just disintegrates, and there's no big piece of the building left. Oops. This slide is just pointing out the forceful ejections. You can see the blasts going out horizontally from as the building comes down. This building is not part of the World Trade Center complex. It's probably about 450 feet away, and you can see it's got pieces of metal just sticking out of it like somebody took a spear and threw it. Now, what would make metal be ejected like that? A building collapsing from just the gravitational energy that it had would not send steel that weighs as much as two Boeing aircraft hurtling across 400 feet and lodging in other buildings. That gravitational energy acts downward, not horizontally. Then another obvious, to me, indication of the presence of explosives is this thermal image taken by NASA on September 16th. Now, at that point, firemen have been dousing the site with water for 5 days, yet, and it's pretty difficult to see on this slide, but this is the blown up area. There was identified eight hot spots that had temperatures, even at that point, that were high enough to melt aluminum. You would not get that if the building just collapsed into itself because of a regular fire. You need something like an explosive like thermite or thermate that produces molten metal and results in these kind of hot spots. And indeed, molten metal was found. A number of witnesses that I've seen on video and elsewhere talk about the molten iron that's dripping when the cleanup workers were pulling the debris out of the site. Some of the steel beams would be dripping with molten metal, and indeed there's videos of molten metal dripping out of one of the towers. And the only thing that I can understand that could cause that is the presence of an explosive like thermate. This is a quote, and I'm wrapping up here, from our president 2 months after the events, in a speech to the United Nations. He says that we should never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories, and I agree. I just happen to believe that the facts, the laws of nature, and the observable evidence that's out there supports a conspiracy theory that is different from the one that we've been told. In my mind, that is the theory that's outrageous. And all I ask is that what I'm calling for is a new and independent investigation to look into what I think is the most serious crime our nation has seen to this point. this is just, I'll leave you with a couple of quotes. This one's by German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. He says, all truth passes through three stages. First, it's ridiculed. Second, it's violently opposed. And third, it's accepted as being self-evident. I'm convinced that at some point in the future, hopefully not too long, we're going to see what I think is the truth of what brought down these towers, and we're all going to go, you know, that's self-evident. Why didn't we see that? When you look at the buildings, that's clearly what happened. I think we're going to come to that time. And then finally, from a good American transcendentalist, Ralph Waldo Emerson, God offers to every mind its choice between truth and repose. Take which you please, you can never have both. And I hope not to have caused you significant mental disturbance today, but I think it's necessary when I think that when it's what's going on in our world and our country. And having your mind at unease is not a bad thing if we act on it. And so I would urge each of you to call for an independent investigation of what happened that day. And I appreciate your attention today, and I don't know if you have time for questions, but I know I've taken probably much more than was allotted. So thank you very much.